For today, we have a talk by Cordula Vesper, and as Cordula will probably tell more about, it ties into our project on experimenting, experiencing, reflecting, which is kind of an art-science collaboration project. But I will leave you, Cordula, to tell more about that. So pass on the Zoom screen to you.
All right. And we'll do the sharing. All right, I hope you can see the slides. Yes, thank you very much. This is a very much explorative, experimentative talk for me. It's the first time I'm going to talk about this, and it's also the first time I'm going to talk about this kind of form of collaboration, and it's kind of going a little bit out of my comfort zone in some respects, but I think it's a really cool project. So what I decided to do today is to tell you some parts of something. So what I would like you to think of as my talk today is much more a sort of story of how things developed, and a little bit less this kind of hardcore science talk, but it's much more about how was the progress, how did we approach something that tries to combine and really bridge art and science, and how did we go about that. So what I'm hoping is that maybe soon I can give part 2 of this talk, where I can talk even more about the kind of findings that we are hoping to do. But what I'm hoping to show you today is this process, and also where things are difficult and inspirational as well. Yes, oh, here we are. So as Andrea said, this is part of the EER project, which stands for Experimenting, Experiencing, Reflecting. And many of you probably know about it, but I'm still going to say quickly about what it is. So it is a collaboration that is really meant to be about bridging science and art. And it is led by the IMC, with Andreas on the forefront, and by the artist Olafur Eliasson and his studio. So it is him, but also a huge amount of people in the background there who engage with us. We have a few people who are really close to us. We have regular meetings with them, but it's kind of the studio that stands behind this. And importantly, ER is really about experimentation, but experimentation in the sense of art and science. So what we are having is a kind of shared interest in all kinds of topics: perception, decision-making, action, notions of togetherness, collaboration, transmission of knowledge. And all these together are what kind of brings us together. So we try to do experiments that are incorporated into art, often inspired by art, as in the one that I'm going to talk about today. And on the other side, it is supposed to inform art again, so that we're getting out and inspiring something new in the creative domain as well. Procedurally, what we try to do is, in most cases, to bring out our work, our experiments, our science into museums and other public spaces. So it is really meant to not be a lab endeavor. And as you will see, this is part of what is so great about it, but also what makes it tricky and challenging. The stuff that I'm talking about today is about one line of the huge project, namely the one that has the basis in the Sunlight Graffiti artwork by Olafur Eliasson, and which we took up to do something that is really at the core of experimenting, experiencing, reflecting. But of course, I have not done this alone. So this is really an ER project. Andreas has been very much engaged in this, but it's the whole team behind it. And of course, I'm going to mention people where needed. So for today, as I said, I'm more focusing on this story and a little bit less on, there are results, but not, for example, a lot of stats. So don't expect that for today. Right, before we start this story, I want you to just watch and hopefully enjoy one of the videos that we recorded while two people were producing movements together with the Sunlight Graffiti. I'm going to explain more about the method, for now, I just want you to think or to enjoy it and maybe think of moving together. How can we see in this what's happening on the screen? In what sense is that moving together? So this is one real case of two participants exploring a new tool, an artwork that we gave them some instructions for as well. But then more or less just we aimed at triggering their creative process. In this particular case, we actually told them, try to move together, draw together, do this together. And I really hope you can see how these two tried to follow these instructions. I want to show you a second video just to start with that looks different. And the reason is that in this case, we also have two people also exploring the space together with this new tool. But in this case, think of that concept of togetherness. So what we had here is we gave our participants, our visitors, all the freedom they had, but we also asked them to try to draw something that would take the concept of togetherness into account. I'll go and explain more about that towards the end of my talk, but I just want you to think of that. How would you do something like that? Would it look like that? So these two videos show you what I'm going to talk about today, namely this process of just moving with light through space in a novel way that is, I think, highly aesthetic. And that doesn't have a lot of constraints and is really all about exploring yourself, the new method, but also the interaction with your partner. So now that you know what I'm talking about, I want to start telling the history a little bit. How did we get there? What is it about? Why did we even start it? So in the very beginning, when ER was relatively new, so the whole project was relatively new, we had a meeting in Copenhagen once where we just started brainstorming about, could we do something with sunlight graffiti? As a result of that first meeting, we came up with a whole series of different events. We call them activities, and it's basically individual events in particular museums where we used this method, but we also developed it, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So this first meeting in Copenhagen kind of set the frame for what was to come, and then we'll see how this developed. When I joined the ER, because I was relatively new in Aarhus as well, I admit I didn't know that much about Olafur Eliasson. So this first meeting at Copenhagen was also, together with a few others, really important to just to understand what is it that the studio of Olafur Eliasson is really interested in. And I'm very sure many of you know a lot more about him or have longer relationship to this work. But here are just some examples of what the studio is interested in. So it's really, really broad, interest in perception, in color, but also in this embodiment of how you embody, for example, light or perception. It's strongly interested in social interaction, but also has these many other interests like sustainability, environment, food, architecture, design, and so on and so on. One of the aspects where they kind of combined these different interests is in what is called sunlight graffiti. Sunlight graffiti was invented, if you want, in 2012. So it's an artwork from 2012 by Olafur Eliasson, but it is also a sustainability project in itself. So this little light here is called Little Sun, and it is a light source that also has the purpose of bringing light to people in regions where you do not have electricity, for example. So it has these two different sides, and it's also developed not just by an artist, but also by an engineer, and it has this huge impact. Now the question, of course, is not just a lamp, right? I mean, it is, but is it maybe something more? So I have a very short video sequence from Olafur Eliasson explaining why he thinks it is actually art itself.
I'm totally convinced it's a work of art. As people sometimes ask me, is it design or is it art or is it just a product? Well, this is just an object. It's a piece of plastic with a solar panel and an LED and a few rechargeable batteries inside. There's not going to be much art in that unless you use it in a way which makes it artistic. And that is my aim.
Right. So that is what I learned in this first meeting, that Olafur Eliasson likes to use these, in this case, little sun, in a way that we create art by using it, right? So, and that fits really well to what I find interesting. So here's another quote from him, really showing how he saw this lamp that you can use not only to bring light to remote regions, help people read or do their work in the evening, but also because we can use it in a way that does something with our body, our experience, our statics. So this quote says, how can we dance light? How can we perform power physically? So he's really interested in having this energy source in your hand. With a little sun in your hand, you can draw in 3 dimensions. You can dance the feeling of being a power station. Light is a power that helps you shape your life. So that is the words of an artist. Here are some images I just took from their original 2012 artwork, where you can see people were invited in museums to just use this lamp and draw with it. And I'm, as I said, going to talk more about how this method is done. But basically it was all about taking an object that can be used in everyday life, bringing it into a museum, and then let people do the art themselves. And I think this is very beautiful, the result. Now, that is what I learned about their background in these meetings. But then, of course, there's a lot of connection points to what I find interesting myself. I myself am a cognitive scientist with a background in more experimental psychology, and I'm really trained in doing lab experiments. My main interest is in joint action. So I'm interested in, I mentioned some things here, for example, how people coordinate when they have a goal they want to reach together. So how do you coordinate your movements to achieve something together? And it's really, in a lot of my research is all about movement. So that's where we resonated very much immediately. So what I usually, and many of my research studies have, is tracking people's movements with kind of devices like you see in the pictures, in order to understand what are the processes involved in adapting your movements to each other and so on. So I'm interested also in joint goals and how you feel you're in control of that, how you represent something that the partner is doing. And of course, this has a strong relation to music and rhythm as well, especially the movement side of it. And more recently, I'm interested in communication through movement. Now, so this is how I came to Copenhagen. And then basically throughout this whole project in ER, I was thrown into this new way of thinking as well. So this is about art, about aesthetics, museums, qualitative data. So I felt a little bit like this for a short moment. And every now and then I feel like that again, I can say. However, what is so exciting about it is that we can inspire each other, right? So after this moment of shock of reading and hearing words that were new and new ideas, the main idea here is really to bring this together. So what I would say are core parts of this whole Sunlight Graffiti project is to answer these questions. And I promise you, we haven't found the answers yet. So you will not find the final answer in the end. But what we are interested in is how can we conduct something that is interesting research about joint action, social interaction outside the lab and in collaboration with artists. And a very important part of the whole project of ER is how can we really take into account what it is that participants are experiencing. So how can we shape the experience of joint action and togetherness for those people who are participating. And that means, of course, that we somehow need to bridge this gap between artwork and experiment, right? So I'm listing a few things that we needed to get the basis for in the beginning of the project. So when we started talking, we had kind of one side coming from art, and we had another side of people coming more from experiment, and then some who really are skilled already in the bridging. But what we had to do in this particular case is to bridge that ground. So that meant, for example, convincing each other about what are the questions that are interesting. What can we even ask that would qualify as an experiment and still be an artwork? We had a lot of discussions about just getting to know each other's terminology. So for example, I had never thought of something I would call an exhibition as being a show. That's how they talk about it. So you have to learn your vocabulary. I had to explain when I used words like a between factor design, right? That is something that the studio is not necessarily familiar with, and many others. So that was interesting. And then most importantly, we needed to create a procedure that works both for art and for science and solve technical problems. So I'm now going to talk about how we actually implemented that. So after this first meeting, we said, let's try to do something. We came up with something new, like a new question. And this new question was about, can we do this social? Can we put this into a social context? On the technical side, that meant changes. The original artwork was really about art. So you would be drawing, you were interested in the effect on the screen, on the in the new art that was created. You were not back then interested in tracking the movements of the people who created it necessarily. So when we decided to make this a social, as Sunlight Graffiti 4.2, we needed to find ways in order to also have the experiment side covered. And that meant making sure that we can track the movements of participants. Here's a short demonstration of how the artwork kind of works. So what is behind it? And this is all work that the designer Daniel Messi has done for the studio when it was the original artwork, but also in collaboration with us now. So basically what it is a tracking of a strong light source, and the light source is these little suns. You need a very dark room in order to get the strong enough contrast. The movement of the sunlight is filmed by camera, and that's where you really need the strong contrast, because the software can then track where in the darkness these strong light sources are. You need a computer with the software, of course, running this. And then in order to make this embodied large experience, we don't want to have it on a small screen, but we really want to have it in a big space where you can walk around, which is why you need some projection screen. We also had to bring in some color filters. This is just details in case you're interested, because as I said, we needed to differentiate the two people. So in the original artwork, it didn't matter kind of which movement came from which hand, which light source, but now we do want to know this. And in order to solve this, we changed, we put these filters on top of the lamps in order to exploit the different qualities, or the different light qualities of red and blue. If anyone has more questions, I'm happy to talk about this. But what I want to show is just how you also need to make changes to the artwork in order to make it experiment. After solving the technical side, we could start. So here's the first thing I want to talk a little bit longer about, our first attempt to bring this new Sunlight Graffiti 4.2 out to people and to see what that would do to them. So these very first questions we had were in some sense very simple. So first it was really, can we actually turn this artwork also in an experiment? Does that work? How do people react to it? And then more specifically, we tried to see whether by making it a social project, can we generate feelings of togetherness for our participants? Can we somehow use this art to change people and how they feel about each other? And in that sense, can we learn something about joint action performance? Here's some pictures. You'll see a lot of pictures today because, I mean, going out into a museum really means you're taking so much care in making things aesthetic. So we really spent a lot of time preparing the room. I didn't mention, this first event was at Tate Modern in London as part of a larger event that's called Tate Exchange. When it still happened before Corona, of course, it was a place where all kinds of science and yeah, experiments were brought into Tate Modern, and people could just go around, explore it. So what we had is a whole lot of people who were really open to trying out new things and exploring something that is between art and science. So we spent a lot of time preparing the room as well to make it dark so the technical side would work, but also to make it a pleasant experience for participants. And then we had 2 people invited all the time. They came in and we just asked them to use these light sources and draw. We deliberately were very open in terms of instructions. We just basically instructed them just to use these lights and to be creative. Right, so to start positive, this was a really big success in many ways, especially if you'd ask participants, you know, how did you like it? So we had them do this task for a couple of minutes, and afterwards we asked them to fill in a short questionnaire. And as you can see, people are overall very, very happy with the task. So they very much enjoyed creating the sunlight and drawing, so this activity. And it seems they felt very happy while creating the sunlight drawing. And I just added a few quotes we got from participants, and you can again see people were really, really, yeah, had very strong emotional reactions to it. And it seems very strongly because of this mix between aesthetics and doing it themselves. Now, right, so that is great. I now want to briefly talk about where we try to bring in the science, the experiments. So as I said, we try to leave it very open how people would use it, but we did want to change something in the task itself so that then we have this tiny bit of an experiment in there to see whether we can find some differences in how people use our task. And to do this, we had 2 different modes of our experiment. I'm going to show you. This here is what we call long traces. So here, like you saw in the video in the beginning, you really see how people draw and everything stays on the screen. So what we expected in a sense is that people might use this in a more figurative way, that they would really like to do this drawing on the screen, that they would really like to create something. Now, the other mode in which we used our experiment, we called short traces. So the only difference we made is that now the movement that you made didn't stay on the screen very long. So there was just this small trace that followed you, but you couldn't create something that stayed there for a long time. And our idea was that maybe because you don't make this drawing, that it would trigger some more focus on the dynamic aspect of movement, right? So maybe it would focus more on, make you focus more on your own body or on the partner, on just the presence in there. Just very briefly, so this idea that you might focus more on the outcome or on the process is something that has a long tradition in movement science and in cognitive science. I'm being quite brief here now, but basically a lot of theories of human action control would suggest that if we have a goal in mind, we would plan and perform the movements towards these goals with the desired outcome in mind. So we're really planning our movements in a way that these would create the desired outcome. And this might also apply to joint action, right? But now we of course have a joint outcome. So it is not just my own goal, but we kind of need to align our joint goal to that. this is nice, but when we come to creative movement contexts like the one we have here, it becomes really difficult, and to even know about so the joint goal here is less clearly defined, right? So it is not necessarily that we say, okay, in the end, we want to have build this new, I don't know, chair together, but it seems that it's much more the creative movement context that is relevant. And actually, I want to say, because I said this is only part one of hopefully another talk. So this is also areas, if anyone has literature that would be relevant, I would be happy to learn more about this as well. But for us, the idea was that possibly this these changes we made on whether or not something stays on the screen or is removed would maybe change the focus in the process of moving, so that when you don't see what you're creating too much, you might more focus on this embodied creativity, if you want. And just to show you a little bit more what I mean with this, there's probably a lot more work on this, but there's this one paper that I find really inspirational by Tommy Himberg and colleagues on how we can think of the aesthetics of kinesthetic togetherness, which means movement, right? So what they talk about in their paper is collective dance improvisation. I think we can kind of consider what we're doing here is sort of collective dance improvisation. They have a very different task, but the point is the same. So what they say is that in such improvisation, moving together is not merely a byproduct of the activity, but can be its very aim. We consider this aspect in a wider definition, where moving together is not merely the quality of similarity or synchronicity of the movements, but intrinsically related to the feeling of togetherness that arises in interaction. We see this aesthetic experience of togetherness stemming from the improvisers regulating their movements to favor their own and collective aesthetic pleasure of moving together. Thus, our approach of collective improvisation is an attempt to counteract the usual view that aesthetic study focuses on external properties of objects, be they dancers moving on a stage, and on the experience of a single person. Right? So I am not an expert in aesthetics, but I can see where there's this friction that might come up between, is it the outcome that contains the aesthetics, or is it also the process in it? And I think the essence of EER, our project, is to see, can we combine this in a sense? Still, for this particular first experiment that we ran, we thought, let's play with this. Can we just, through the movement, modulate somehow this feeling of togetherness by making people focus more on the effect on the screen or more on this movement and the production? And to make it short, we do not have strong results for that. We do not have these beautiful results I would like to have shown you. But still, I haven't given up, and I definitely haven't considered the actual movement yet. So that's where part 2 eventually will come. What we have here, though, is ratings from participants after the experiment was done, right? Remember, they got out of it, and then we asked them to fill in a questionnaire. So these not at all strong results point in the right direction, though. We had 2 questions we asked them. The first one was, how much were you focused on your body while drawing? And what's plotted down here is basically, maybe we should start looking here, is the joint condition, where we had the case with long traces and short traces. And what we can see is the rating is minimally higher when it comes to the short traces, right? And again, not very strong. We clearly need to work also on, I'm going to talk about that, work on the wording, on how we instruct people. But I'm already happy it's kind of going in the right direction. We also had the same done with individuals. And again, here also you experience just a little bit that you're focusing more on your body when you have just these short traces where where the movement vanishes or the drawing vanishes for a moment. And then the opposite question we asked, how much were you focused on the effects on the screen while drawing? Again, not strong result at all, but going in the right direction. So this gives a little bit hope. Here, the direction is that when we ask about how much you focused on the screen, what was happening there, we expected that it was more the long traces that would trigger this kind of focus on that. And we see that these light blue bars are a tiny bit higher than the dark blue ones. So this was, just to remind you, our very first ever attempt to bring the sunlight graffiti as an artwork into a museum as an experiment, right? So I'm not very disappointed that these are not brilliantly strong results, because we really had to try out so many things. It was such a process of finding out how to do this. Still, here are just some examples of what kind of we expected to find. I talked about the long traces maybe triggering people to be a bit more figurative, drawing things, whereas the other one would be more about movement. So here you see just example of one participant pair. Don't mind the colors, that's just when I imported them and then plotted in red and blue instead of yellow, just to be very clear about where the different participants are plotted. So what we have here is the long trace condition, and you see some people at least started drawing. I have a few more such example. We have some nice figures that really inspires to draw these more figurative things. And when you take away what stays on the screen, we get into much more chaotic movements, which really show that you're doing more of this dancing. At least it seems like that. So that was our first attempt. And of course, the point was also to learn from it. So here are some of the quotes. We got a lot more from what people left as feedback on the questionnaire. So for example, they said, this is really interesting. It's like painting with an edge on a sketch on a really big level, or on a big level. But this person also said, did not work with my partner, ended up as 2 separate drawings. And I guess that's exactly what you also could see in the examples I've just shown you. People were basically using their screen. So what we try to learn from that is that in order to make this an activity about togetherness and jointness, we might need to tell them about it, right? So in our very first attempt, we were very free to say, let's do it, see what happens, but maybe we actually need to inform people. Then the next quote says, I'd love to do it again. I'm not that good at drawing and I try to draw a thing. I was a bit literal about the word draw. I'd love to go abstract and geometric. So again, this is something we had to learn from, because we used the word draw in talking about it, not realizing that some people would really be hindered in their creativity and feel that they actually have to make a drawing, right? So again, it's something we could learn from, highlighting this creative process more. And the last one says, I'm a terrible drawer, didn't manage to draw the thing I wanted, so I just moved around with the lights and ended up with a spaghetti drawing. So that's great, right? So what this person is doing is, this person decided to just highlight or go for the movement. So we said, maybe we should highlight this more, that it is about movement and a form of dance. Good, I hope you're still with me. That was the first part in our story that is continuing. We had a short thing. So Tate Exchange was in June 2019. In August, we had a short visit to the arts faculty summer party. Maybe some of you actually took part there. And then in October, we brought the activity into the Steno-museet on the campus. And I'm not going to talk about this very long. I just want to mention that this was one step in the process. So after we've seen that giving people all the freedom and just asking them to do something also meant that they didn't really know what to do with it, some at least. we thought, let's try to regain some experimental control. There were other reasons for these decisions, one of them being that the Steno Museum experiment was targeted at children. So what we did here is we actually gave them a proper co-drawing task where we had pairs of children actually produce a particular thing. It was like a teddy bear or a sun, and this was done in collaboration with Caroline, a bachelor student at that time from cognitive science. So she really tried to make it, or together we tried to make it into an experimental procedure. And here you can see some impression of it, and just for fun. Oh, okay, am I back? Good. Just to show you how different this is. Here we instruct them draw a sun together. And you can maybe see that one light is a bit more yellow and one is a bit more white. And this is the two people, the two children drawing together. It was really, really, really nice and funny to see children trying to draw these things. We also played around here with the short and the long traces, but I'm not going into details here. But what we were interested in is basically how would seeing the outcome affect your co-drawing. To make it short, this was, I could talk a long time just about that one, but here I only want to mention some reflections we got from this. So the first one, also the second iteration was a lot of success in many ways. It was very engaging and fun for children and also for the adults accompanying them. But then again, what we gave up a bit is this free, creative, artsy performance, right? We really gave them a task to do. What this means in terms of balancing art and science, it means we need to balance somehow participant experience, how fun it is, what's happening, and experimental control. And I think this is, in a sense, the essence of what I'm learning in this project as well, is how difficult it is to have this balance. What we learned here again is to emphasize togetherness for the next iteration, invite participants to share and to focus on their own and their partner's movements. And what we really wanted to do in the next one is to try to really trigger some transformations through moving and the artwork. So the next one I want to talk about is the, we took it to the Trappold Museum in Kolding, and there was a specific occasion in December 2019. It was a light festival. Again, some of you might have joined us there. And here we really took it serious, everything we had learned at this point, right? We really thought now we're giving participants much more to help them get this change. So we gave them detailed instructions. We really wanted to provide this calm, quiet environment with more time as well, so that you really get into the mood. And we wanted to ask whether really focusing on being there together would also change something about the creative joint drawing. Here are some impressions from that event. Again, it's a lot of preparation. If you bring something that requires complete darkness into a museum, you need to spend a lot of time just preparing and then figuring out the technical details. But as you can see, we managed quite well to have this space used in this way. Now, as I said, now we really try to combine experience and experiment. So in order to do this, we created a research design with a kind of intervention design where we gave participants time to freely draw twice. It was always 2 minutes. And we gave them instructions that were like this. In this first exercise, I would like you to try to hold on to the idea that you are light. You're holding a little power station. That's the reference to Olafur Eliasson, of course, in your hand, an energy source, so you are light. And then I would like you to try to dance light together. So really framed the whole thing as dancing light together. And we gave the same instructions for this last part. So what we wanted to do is really trigger this togetherness feeling through informing them what we would like them to do. Right? It was always an invitation, not a necessity. Now, in between these two free drawing parts where they could just explore and be creative, we had what you could call an intervention. So this was another part in there that we tried to make them focus on a specific thing in order to get maybe some change. And a part of our participants got this instruction about drawing together. So here we said in this exercise, you will experience that the lines do not stay on the screen. And that is because we have these short traces, but disappear after a short time. Yeah, important is the following. In this exercise, I would like you to try to explore the space together. I would like you to invite you to have as much focus on the other person as you have on yourself. So now we used again our manipulation with the short traces versus the long traces. Because this was the other part two for some other participants where we asked them to try to explore or interpret the word togetherness. And again, try to have as much focus on the other person as you have on yourself. Now, again, I will not be able to show you a lot of results for this, but I want you to understand why we thought this is an interesting aspect. So basically these two instructions, which I called here draw together or draw togetherness, come from different literatures where we are trying to trigger how people get more into this togetherness, into the sharedness through different routes. So the group of participants who, where we asked them to kind of move together and attend to each other, they were, well, we were expecting that this is kind of a bottom-up process of moving in synchrony would make them feel more united, and through that also create this feeling of togetherness. And I'm just showing the two videos again that I showed you in the very beginning, because this is from these two conditions. And then the other one is more about visualizing some abstract concept. And in order to do that, to come up with how you can draw togetherness, you really need to align your mental representation of something. So by the way, I didn't mention it, but we asked participants not to talk to each other. So this was really about being attentive to each other's movements and trying to align perspectives and mental states here. Right, here are a few more drawings just to show how these different instructions would lead to very different outcomes. So on the left, we have when people have the short traces that vanish very quickly and they just move in space together. Whereas on the right side, we have where the long traces stay in the screen and we ask them to make a drawing of togetherness. The interpretations, as you can see, are also very different. And I need definitely more time also to look into them individually. Right. So we also asked them how they liked it. And you can see that overall people liked it quite a lot, these different parts. But what is interesting for us, and finally here we have something that one could also take serious from an experimental point of view. So here we have ratings of how much they like the different parts. And this is in the draw together or the draw togetherness condition. And what we see is from light blue to dark blue is how much higher they rated the second time they were drawing freely compared to the first time. So what we see is a form of change that came into how much they liked the task they were doing, that we could argue was triggered through our intervention in the middle. And similarly, when we asked them how much was something that you did together, how much did you share the control in the drawing, we also see that at least for parts of this, no, actually, yeah, here we see also that people overall felt they were more doing it together, more controlled it together in the third time they were drawing together. Good. As I said, this is very much in progress. So I just want to spend a very short moment to say where this analysis should go to. if we see it's useful for these kind of data. But let's say the project is going to a place where we also not just want to look at the questionnaires that we ask people to report how much they liked it or how much they felt they focused on something or the other, but really see this in the movement traces. But that is the part that is ongoing. But I want to say one kind of direction that this is going to take, because I really like this literature that tries to bridge this aesthetic creative movement side and tries to find some markers of that. And one of them that maybe some of you know is work by Leo Noy and colleagues, where it's all about quantifying just how much you are in line with each other. There's of course a huge literature in general about synchronization and you know, being entrained and you just becoming one through the environment. But here it's really about in this, when you're trying to be together, when you're trying to do something together, can we quantify just how much you are together? And this is at least one approach to be taken here. So what you can see in these graphs are movements of two people, red and blue, and you can see that here is the case where one is more following and the other one is leading. So you see how the two lines are not overlapping, but one is always a little behind and reacting to what the other is doing. Whereas here we can truly talk about joint, or in their words, co-confident motion. So really you're doing this task together. You're not moving from one side, not one is moving and the other one is following. We do not have movement data for that yet, but we do have some information about that. And I'm sorry that I didn't have time to translate this, but we did, another innovation we did with this particular experiment was to say, let's have more information from our participants. Let's spend more time and ask them. So we had short interviews after they had gone through the 3 parts of the performance. And here I've just taken one small quote out from one of the pairs, because we also asked them, did you sometimes have the impression that one of you was leading and the other one was following? And then in this particular interview, both of them said more or less at the same time, I try to follow you. So what we really have, and then everyone laughs about it. So what we have is a situation where at least they have this impression that none of them is really leading, but that each is following the other. And of course, that would be what I'm now trying to work on, is to see, can we actually see that in the movement traces? And then the interviewer asked again, this was Andreas, by the way, doing the interviews back then, have you learned something about each other? And then they respond that sometimes they, it feels as if you do things, or as if you are together without actually explicitly following each other, which they found was very funny. And how do you know we are together or not? So it seems that they experienced this as if they were thinking as one, which they also found very funny. So what I want to say is just we do have even more rich data that due to COVID and all kinds of other reasons haven't really been looked into in depth, but it seems this would be a really rich source to understand this concept of togetherness even better. Right, and just to show you, this is the same pair. What is plotted again is their movement traces. And of course, now what would be interesting is to see the temporal development of that. Right, I'm almost at the end. I just want to mention the currently last step in this journey, and who knows what else is coming, especially when it's possible to do these interactive co-present activities again. In the beginning of 2020, this activity, because we felt it was a success, what we had done in Trappold, because people really were engaged and they reported these changes. So we exported it to Japan. I mean, when I say we, this was really the studio who took care of bringing it into the museum as part of an exhibition by Olafur Eliasson into the Museum of Modern Art in Tokyo. So here are, again, some impressions. We made some really big changes, and the big changes were that there was no experimenter present for the first time. So until now, it was always that some of us was there guiding participants, talking to them. And in this case, what we tried for the first time is, can we actually make a procedure where participants can learn about it through text? And just to show you how this looked like. So we just basically gave them these instructions on as form of slides in the room where they were also engaged in the task, where we instructed them how they could think about it. We try to follow the trapode procedure as close as possible. So also asking them to have these 3 different stages in which they were drawing together. In the first part, you can explore dancing light with the little sun. So here really being like, just find out what's happening. And the second part, we asked them to dance light again, but now in this fading traces, so the short traces. And importantly, we also try to create this feeling of togetherness here by asking them to explore the space together, to try to focus on your partner's movements as much as on your own movements. And in the end, they were again invited to just dance light together. We did not record the movements because this was huge and we just couldn't do this also in the middle of the pandemic. So what we did only is we had participants do the activity, but we also had a questionnaire. So again, I'm showing some questionnaire results, and please see that before we had maybe 20 participants for activities. Now we suddenly had 4,000 visitors who filled in our questionnaire. So that was quite a change. And the thing that I really want to point out is that people overall really enjoyed it again. So this violet bar here says, did you enjoy dancing light with your partner? And they were all obviously really happy. But what I like as well is that we asked them whether, did you feel like you were dancing light together with your partner during the third part? So was something from this middle instruction really triggering some change towards the other, like towards the third part? And it seems most of them did experience togetherness in this third part. And also when we explicitly asked them, did your experience of dancing light together with your partner change from the first part to the third part? Most people also rated this as yes. Some, of course, also said maybe not so much, but it seems overall a lot of people experienced a change from the first part to the third part, which one could argue guided by our instructions. We also got a lot of information that they actually gave us as well, but again, this needs to wait for some part 2 until we have found someone who can help us translate, because of course these were in Japanese most of the time. But still, we can hopefully learn also something from what they reported as how did their experience change. So we asked them, for example, whether they have learned something about their partner or about themselves. And this is, of course, a really rich data source that's at the moment just lying there. So anyone wants to join in looking at that, talk to us, please. Good. Then I just want to end with some final kind of personal reflections. I think I've mentioned all this throughout the talk, but as it really is a new experience for me, and I'm totally enjoying it. It's really enriching to get out and ask yourself, how can you do something not in a lab, not in a place where you can pay your participants and therefore ask them to do what you think they should be doing, but where you really need to rely on people doing this voluntarily and where they have demands on what the experience for them is, right? So that's super enriching, but I can say it's also very exhausting. And the reason is that it becomes really messy in a sense to understand where art ends and science starts and where science ends and art starts. So we really struggle sometimes between this balance that I draw here again, between what can you actually do and what can't you do. And for me personally, I can really say that what I'm still struggling with sometimes is where should I be, and I call it strict, but of course you can call it whatever. So where should I push for the experimental control that I'm used to and that I believe in and that I think is really important for interpreting our data? And where are the moments where you just need to be relaxed about them in order to come up with something new, trigger some different experience? And I don't think there's an answer to it. And I hope what you could see throughout this journey that I depicted here is how this also changed. So we've really gone from very open and creative to more constrained to guided, but still focusing on experience and so on. And on every stage, you can come up with reasons why, you know, alternative explanations, different ideas on how to interpret it, because it's not a lab experiment. But then again, it has so much quality that we wouldn't necessarily manage in a lab. I just want to mention that we came up with this recent discussion in our group, which I find just super interesting, is also what are we even allowed to do? It's not such a big problem in this particular case, but what we are doing is we are inviting people to change, right? So even if it's just small, at least in our current state of the project, we are giving them something where we're hoping that they feel differently afterwards, that they see themselves or their partner differently. So it is also something to be aware of as soon as you go outside of the lab, that you need to have this care also about participants. So I find this a really interesting discussion that I hope we continue with. And then of course, ambitions, it means, which ambitions do we have for the outcome? So, you know, how much can we do for advancing science? And where do we also need to say what we're more doing is bringing it out and testing it in the real. So my conclusion from my side is that I think really taking experimenting and reflecting seriously is clearly not easy. But I would say it's really worth the try to bridge these different things. And with that, I want to thank the people who were part of this. I mean, there's a lot of effort involved. So Andreas has been with this, of course, the whole time. Daniel Messi is the designer who did all the programming and backend and whatnot. Sophie Erlund is from the studio, who has been really strongly involved in all this planning as well. Olafur Eliasson, of course, has done the artwork and is the creative brain in that respect. And then we have a couple of other people, Jenny Lur, a colleague who was helping us with creating these sense of agency questionnaires, Charlotte Torne, one of the experimenters at Rappold, Caroline Steen from who helped me with the experiment in Steno Museum. And in general, we have a lot of people in the ER team that helps with thinking, brainstorming around being there, testing, and so on. And we've also had a couple of fantastic assistants who helped us, for example, in the Tate Exchange to actually do the whole work. And if you're interested in reading more or just reading again about it, we have a pretty detailed website. I think I will add a bit more now that I've had to make this talk and think through it. But so you can read about all the activities we have as part of Sunlight Graffiti, but also, of course, the other activities we have as part of ER on our website. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Cordula. It's so great to see these videos and pictures from what seems now like, you know, in a completely different time where you could actually just be together and dance in a public space. And it's also formidable to hear how the narrative and how the iterations are unfolding. I had completely forgotten what we were actually learning from these different versions. And I think that in itself is just exemplary. So without further ado, I'll open the talk for questions or comments. Just raise your hand and shoot it out. Yeah, Jenny?
Yeah, hi. So thank you for this talk. I have loads of questions. So let's start with the easiest one. Can you go back to slide 35?
Yep. Okay. Here, I need to click share. 35.
35, yes. just a minor clarification here. Yeah, so here, just tell me if I'm wrong, but I think like the major difference here is between the two light blue columns, and this is before the intervention.
Oh, that's also an interesting difference, which of course, yes, totally true. No, but the main thing that I want to highlight is of course between part 1 and part 3.
Yes, so
before and after.
yeah,
But yes,
but we can't see really a difference in the intervention between the effect, because it could be just a ceiling effect. Exactly. on the dark blue.
And even more, if I may add, we do not have like a proper control condition, something where, you know, we don't have any intervention or anything. Totally true.
The second question, did the pairs that did this together, did they know each other from before the experiment, or and do you think it matters? So do you think we would have had different results if you had?
Great question. Absolutely great. That is one of the things that more depth analysis would maybe tell us. So what I can say is that we always ask, and in the Trappold version where this graph comes from, I think everyone knew each other, at least on the like colleague level or so. Whereas in the Tate Exchange, the first one, we also had a lot of people who just walked around individually, and we asked them, do you want to come together and do this task with stranger? So I would say it totally matters for this feeling of togetherness. It very clearly matters how comfortable you feel. I would still say that it doesn't matter for feeling more connected after such an intervention. So we've also had some other activities as part of ER, and I'm sure there's more somewhere else in similar projects, where we really see that doing something rather intimately for a short time can also just change your perspective a bit on someone else. So I would say I can't answer right now how that is in our data set, but I'm very sure it has an impact on how people feel.
Okay. You expressed some concern earlier about dealing with qualitative data, and
I didn't say concern, but yeah.
No, you didn't say concern. You used a stronger language than that. So I was wondering, do you have a way of translating the shapes that people were drawing into quantitative data? Because one thing that I would have expected is perhaps with the short trace, people would draw, because they would not be able to draw anything, you know, very elaborate. Yeah. They would be more constrained to just copying each other's movement or doing more, you know, short-term synchronization. This is what I would have thought, but of course the top two pictures in the draw togetherness kind of suggest that this is also the same for the long trace. So I don't really find.
Can you repeat? So what is the same in the long trace that is doing?
So I would expect in the short trace condition people to be more you know, like short-term synchronized with each other, basically to draw the same thing or maybe the exact opposite or something very clearly is synchronized. But does it also happen with? I mean, I think I see it also kind of happens with the long trace. So maybe it's. So yeah. Can you explain that?
No, I mean, this is good observation. So to answer a couple of things. First of all, I really hope I didn't say I don't think qualitative data are useful. I really think so. I really hope this was not misunderstood here. What I said is, for me, from my training, my background, it became some novelty, some challenge. But I think what we have here is a data set where I'm hoping we will manage to bring this together. The different aspects. So in that sense, I think it would be great to quantify these movements really on an individual level as well, and kind of say what is happening here and so on. There are a lot of things we can do with these movements. I just haven't had enough time, unfortunately, yet. But now my motivation
you're looking into.
Got up again with giving this talk as well. This was part of my aim. So we can clearly quantify that. One impression I got, but this is really just from being there and observing what happens, is, and I think that's what you mean as well, is that we give them different instructions, but it could be that what they actually do is a similar outcome. So it could be that even if we want to get through this bottom up or this top down stream of creating togetherness, that maybe how they interpret it and what they do with their movements is not that different. So that's very much possible. I'm not sure whether that's what.
I mean, when you look at these drawings, I mean, I'm not an artist nor an art critic, but I think it would be objectively true, or at least not very contentious, to say that these are rubbish representations of the abstract concept of togetherness. I mean, if you look at it, you don't think, togetherness. But yeah, anyway.
No, you're right. I mean, I must also add that we asked them to do this for 3 minutes, which is a really long time to draw, right? Yeah. So in that sense, there are ways in which one could say a strict test of this would have maybe changed that a bit as well. Yeah.
The final question, other people have questions as well. But you talk about collaboration between art and science. And obviously these are two very different fields, and there are two different frameworks with different beliefs, different assumptions, different frameworks for making sense of the world, different goals, different everything. Basically, it's two human endeavors. So what is, do you think, what is the common ground between these two fields that enables you to indeed to collaborate on anything?
I think there must be many answers to that. The first that comes to my mind right now is the individual experiencing it, in a sense. So that what we are looking at is how an individual, or in our case, pairs of individuals, make sense of something. And that is something that art plays around with all the time, right? It is the essence of making art, as far as I understand. And it is what we are interested in exploring from the science side. So as I said, I'm sure there are more answers to that, but that is kind of what we really want to try to bridge in the big ER project, is to say, we are looking at the experiences people have through different lenses, and we see where we can see similarities, but maybe also differences, right? So maybe it doesn't always fit 100%.
Mark?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Cordula. This, I am very excited about these projects and these experiments. I think it is, so we struggle a little bit with, in PlayTrack, sometimes with trying to measure play. And this is just such a wonderful task when you come at it from that angle. It seems to me that some of the results, like that, if you were to be asked, what is this task about, then if you look at your ratings, it seems that it is about enjoyment. That seems to be the high scorer in the tasks, and it outperforms your other measures, at least in the slides that I noticed.
You mean here with?
No, you have one that is you have one that's just enjoyment, right? In many of them, you had one in the first few slides and one in the okay. There you have one as well.
Okay. Yeah, but sure. Yes.
Enjoyment. Yeah. And you also had one in the early ones where.
Right. Yes, I said here in the very beginning that yeah, no, true. But please ask your question.
So I wonder if you have yet. So you had this really nice graph where you show or where you measure the distance between. I think it was upcoming work, where you track the distance between the lights over time.
Mm-hmm.
Have you yet, or do you intend to look at the relationship between distance and enjoyment?
I'm not sure what distance.
So you have this slide, sort of it's like two bell curves, or almost. There was sort of.
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is not my work, right? So this is work from Lionoy. So yes, I do intend to do this, and I have looked into this. I had high ambitions for getting a lot of things done for this talk, but decided that it doesn't make sense to present half-baked results, right? So that's why I thought today I'm going to tell the story of this and how we approached it, and I'm really hoping that soon I can also talk about more that side of the results. But yes, that's what I'm aiming for.
Okay, great. I mean, we have attempted to operationalize sort of play by a moderate amount of unpredictability, and we had participants playing with a drone and trying to sort of see, you know, is it the case that if they have a moderate amount of difficulty predicting the drone visually, does that then translate into high scores of enjoyment over time?
Yeah.
But our participants complain that it's a task that they have to do alone. They want to play with other people. So I was just thinking that this is really a good task for measuring that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So thank you very much for that. I'm very inspired now.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Just want to mention, so I didn't go much into detail about others' work, but I think you might find the work by Lionoy and colleagues really interesting. They have this task that is very much constrained because you just have movements in one dimension. So you're just having a slider moving back and forth. So it's not as dancing and using a whole space as our task, but this is why they can also more easily have this control in which they look at the individual movements. So yeah, maybe that could be literature to look at as well. But I'll hope they can do that in our data set as well.
Katrin?
Yes, thanks, Cordula. This was really nice to get an overview about. I'm not sure if you mentioned these things, but I'm really curious about this really nice contrast, I think, between drawing together and togetherness. Mm-hmm. And I'm just a bit more interested in the quality of these interactions, the differences. So, what else is there? Any other material did you actually record? Speech? Do they more or less communicate? Did you have any in the interview? Is there anything about how they differently accomplish this? I mean, what goes on when they face these different tasks? Did they report about this? What they, internally did?
Yes, but I don't know right now. So, so I think. So I'm very sure there's more about it, but we actually haven't looked at the interview systematically yet. So that's definitely to be done now. So as I said, and I'm sorry that I used you for that, but this talk was really meant also for me to see where are we actually. Is it actually that interesting, and should we where should we go next, right? So in that sense, I'm sorry that I can't answer everything, but what I can say, we have an incredibly rich data set. We have more interviews, we have more information from the questionnaires and so on. And indeed, my aim would be to really say, like, what is it that a particular pair says, like what I've just as an example showed here, right? What if you have this pair that really says, we thought the same and we really try to follow each other and so on. Can we see that? And ideally in these really kinematic motion traces. That's my ambition, which is whether it works in this kind of messy set.
I think at a certain point we should also shortly talk about if we could do some microchronology on certain moments there. That could be interesting, I think.
Yeah. That's the other thing. We do this really after the whole activity. So it's sometimes hard to ask people about how did you feel in the first part, right? So I think what you're saying, that could be really helpful to really get them back into that state when they were actually drawing. So that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thanks again, Cordula. It was really fantastic to see it unfold, and it's just kind of very brave to also see it so early in the process before we have all the numbers here, and yet the trajectory itself is just very much pointing forward, as you can hear from the comments.